Real pleasure to introduce you to Irish writer Evelyn Conlon. Evelyn, thank you very much for accepting my invitation to be a keynote speaker in our wonderful conference every year. I will first make an introduction, a very brief introduction to Evelyn's work, and then I'm sure that we are all dying to listen into Evelyn's work, thoughts and ideas, so I'll try to be brief. Irish novelist and short story writer Evelyn Conlon was born in Monaghan and lives in Dublin. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? She's an elected member of Universidad, the Irish Association, which honours distinguished work. And Conlon has been writer in residence at University College Dublin and in colleges around the world, and has a deep interest in Australia, where she lived in the early 1970s. There she held a variety of jobs and fell in love with by the landscapes of rural Australia. Conlon has published 3 collections of short story: My Heaviest Opening, published in 1987, Taking Scarlet as a Real Colour, 1993, and Telling New and Selected Short Stories, and 4 novels. Her short stories are widely anthologized and have been translated into many languages, among them Tamil, and later this year Chinese. My Heaviest Opening explores a world in which women struggle to cope and survive, and not always admirably, but Conlon's subversive humour alleviates their bleakness. Taking Scarlet as a Real Colour is an outstanding collection of short stories where the Irish writer tackles ordinary issues such as love, sex, betrayal, and indeed literature, with particularly sharp humour and above all a very humane tone. Telling, which includes 9 new stories alongside 10 of the best of her previously published tales, narrates how the deteriorating way life defies all attempts to control it. Bleak moments in which Conlon's character understand themselves contrast with the stories of characteristically deft irony and right humour. It's been said of the collection that it emerged as the champion of every man and every woman. Conlon's novel deals with social and political dilemmas. Stars in the Daytime and A Glass Full of Letters relate the likes, loves and hates of Irish women and men, both at home and in the diaspora. Skin of Dreams, shortlisted for Irish Novel of the Year, tells the story of Harry Gleeson, who was sentenced to death row for the murder of a woman he did not commit, and Gleeson recently received a posthumous pardon from the Irish government. Conlon has also contributed to other projects. He edited Anna McGarrick, a volume celebrating a quarter century of the Tyrone Guthrie Centre in 2006. Later on, the Monaghan Bombing Memorial Anthology, a collection of work by writers born or living in Monaghan, published 30 years after the Dublin Monaghan bombings, is also worth highlighting because the short stories, essays, poems and excerpts from the novels, edited and compiled by Conlon herself, cover subjects as diverse as geography, sport and Monaghan in the 1940s. Catching the Nine in Two is an important anthology which brings together 34 entertaining and highly enjoyable short stories by Irish women writers. It's a must-read for students of literature, Irish studies and women's studies, and besides this work, Conlon has edited further collections of short stories and poetry. Conlon's latest novel, Not the Same Sky, was first published in 2013, and it earned her the title of Australia's newest Irish novelist. The diary like Not the Same Sky draws on her Australian experience and narrates the moving story of over 4,000 teenage Irish girls, victims of the famine, who were shipped to Sydney to work as domestic servants. Not the Same Sky is a beautifully written novel and intelligent piece that leads us into a face-to-face confrontation with some of the bigger questions concerning memory and journeys. Since then, Conlon has written a large number of short stories that have been published in beautiful edited collections, such as Dubliners 100, Lines of Passion, and then The Longest Back and The Glass Shore, edited by Stephen Gleeson. But I shall ask you about all of them after your reading, if that's okay with you. So present Conlon is working on a new collection, Store Stories, and she says reluctantly, grappling with a series of non-fiction essays about her life as a writer. Conlon's work, whether short story or novel, is fused with originality and humour. And she's brilliant at employing many of the rhetorical strategies of the satirical apparatus, particularly irony and wit. Evelyn, Volta La Rioja, and thank you very much for accepting my invitation to be a keynote speaker at the 16th International AEDEI Conference. We're keen to hear your work, thoughts and ideas, so the floor is yours.
Great. Okay, well, good morning everybody. It's, now that's on, is it? Okay, that's on, yeah. So it's a bit difficult to begin, and yet at the same time it's probably a good thing to begin for me, because then I'll have the rest of the conference in which I'm totally free to just talk about everything. But it was an interesting thing this morning thinking about, because of what was said here, you know, sometimes as a writer you decide what you're going to read. In fact, often you decide what you're going to write, and it doesn't turn out that way. Because of some of the things that were said here this morning, I thought, gosh, that's really interesting. And all these things are going to be discussed while we're here. So I may have changed tack a little bit in what I'm going to read. I am obviously a fiction writer, although I am, as I say, grappling very unhappily with these essays that I'm being forced to do about my life as a writer. Very unhappily. And I was going to give up a few months ago, and then I realised that if I don't do it this year, they'll be at me again next year. So if I just do it now, it'll be done. So, and then I'll happily get back to some short stories. There's a great African-American short story writer called Toni Cade Bambara, who said that she wrote fiction for two reasons. One, if she didn't, the next door neighbour would look for half the royalties. And two, she was a born liar. And in a way, I think I am a born liar, as in that I think that fiction, which is essentially supposed to be a lie but isn't, quite often tells the truth in a more, well, in an easier and sometimes in a more challenging way. And yet at the same time, if we think of ourselves in the cave, and the minute everybody has got enough water and enough bread, somebody will go over into the corner to either paint or to start writing. Well, as it was, it used to be theatre first. And in a way, that's what writers do. Some are more engaged with the public life around them than others, because I, for instance, was very involved in what was called the feminist movement in Ireland, but I believe I was looking for the rights for men as well, because they were going to be using contraception too. Because one of the things we were very involved in, one of the big first battles, was that. So I have always been engaged with the politics around me as well. And that has, of course, fed into my fiction. It can be difficult in some ways because it can pigeonhole me in some ways. But look, you know, what am I to worry about things like that? So some of the work that I will be reading today is quite grounded in actual issues and I'll say no more about it.
Cuando vea que coja carrerilla.
I thought just to begin with, I will read you a little bit about
intentar coger alguna de ellas dos y el público.
I'm kind of in the middle of rescuing women, Irish women who did extraordinary things and that nobody knows anything about, and I'm sort of giving them a little bit of a glimpse of what the world is.
Primero cojo uno de ella con Melania y luego me pongo a hacer lo de los públicos.
This is about an Irish woman who tried to shoot Mussolini in 1926 and who almost succeeded. And if she had succeeded, we have no idea how the world would have gone. It has a tragic sort of ending in that she almost, as I say, succeeded. She spent a year in prison, in the Matulati prison in Rome. Mussolini, because he was the first great macho man ever, he had sent out photographs of himself all over the world, and everybody was in love with him. He was a star, as they said before they knew what his politics was about. She knew, as did many other people, of course, but he didn't want her tried because he didn't like the idea of a woman having nearly got him. So the big thing was to get her declared insane. Now she came from an Anglo-Irish family, and unfortunately her family got involved in this as well. So the agreement was that she would be declared insane and put into a mental asylum in Northampton in England, where even when she turned against Mussolini, even when the war was over and everybody was being released, this woman was kept in the mental asylum in Northampton until the day she died. And when she died, it was discovered she had written all these extraordinary letters, pleading to be sent to a convent to finish her days at a convent, and they had never been written. So I have been trying to find out how I should tell this story. In the end I thought, that's it, it's a letter. So it's called Dear You, and it has been sent in a bottle, so it's addressed to the individual reader who picks up the bottle and is reading this. So she's speaking to you. Dear You, and yes, you are right, it is the old letter in the bottle. I do apologise for the melodrama of it. We have all heard about such a thing, but truly do not expect to be a recipient. And if you are reading this letter, it means that George really did do as I asked. He promised he would, but I've been on the receiving end of those kind of promises before. I discovered last month that all the letters that I have given matron to post have been piled up in a corner, not one of them sent. It was a terrible blow, one final kick. All the letters putting forward reasons why I should now be released. All the letters asked to move to a convent so that I could serve my days there. All the letters explaining the process of my thoughts and my actions. Every one of them piled on top of each other, gathering dust. It is strange that she kept them. You would think that she could at least have burned them. That might have accorded them their seriousness. But no, just piled up in a corner, getting old and unread. So you see, I have no other choice but to try this one way, and it will be my last attempt, I know, when I am beaten. Let me get to the point. I am penning this to you via the gardener from the asylum in Northampton, where I have been forcibly lodged now for the last 30 years. It is the early 1950s, and I've been here since 1927. They call me the Irish woman who shot Mussolini, because that is what I am. They still say that I am insane to have done such a thing, even though they have sent thousands upon thousands upon thousands to their deaths to do that very deed. It is a burden to carry to have done the right thing early, but one that I accept with as good a grace as I can. I will begin near the beginning, although it is hard to know what bits of our beginning make us take action or not, as is the case with most people. What bits make us be part of the wider world looking out? Often the same things that make a sibling gather into themselves and step back into the comfort of their own pettiness. My family and I lived at number 22 Merrion Square in Dublin. It was a grand house, still is, I expect. When I was 9 years old, my father was made Lord Chancellor of Ireland. I remember all the talk about it. I remember the flurrying of carriages, the endless sounds of horses pulling up outside, even at night. I think the boys in the house got more important then, and the girls were expected to do even less than we had done before, but with a lot of dressing up. I didn't attach undeserved seriousness to that, but I went along with it, not knowing what else to do. We had school at home. I particularly liked languages, which were really being taught to my brothers, so that they could fight wars, if necessary, even where English was not spoken. But to get back to my growing up, I did my best to mostly fit in, despite my reading. I occasionally brought up a conversation about women voting. I read mention of it sometimes. And my father congratulated himself that he approved. But I knew that he would want to tell us how to do it, if ever it did happen. He had a way of looking at me, rather startled, when I mentioned it. The same look he used when he said, "Enough is enough." I could hear the capitals on the words. And when that day did come, years after he had died, I remember that I asked my sister not to put a corset on just for once. I said to her, for heaven's sake, we're going to vote. And she looked at me like our father used to. When I was 26, I became a Catholic. It seemed the right, the most engaged thing to do. The announcement of my conversion in the newspaper put an end to the notice of even the more trivial aspects of my life. The family row was all enveloping. How much time it took. What a silly thing for people to get into such a state about how others live their lives. Maybe it is a thing to be envied, to have such energy for interference in what is not one's own existence. In Chelsea, I learned about freedom and about love. That's what it was. It is a time that I don't like to think about because comparison will make me weak with longing. I will lose my voice. My fiancé died. When he died, I slept among his clothes, inhaling him up so he would be inside me. It helped, or so I thought, although it is hard to remember just how black my days became. One long tunnel of hours soaked with grief. We did our best during the awful carnage of the First World War, and then afterwards I went to Rome. I lived a good life. I walked the streets, I breathed the air around the endless history of its buildings. I tended to the poor, as was my wont. I prayed in chapels that took the breath from the prayers with their beauty. My mind flickered and shone with lit candles. I read and I learned. I remember clearly the morning of my deed. I got up at 6 a.m. I should say, at some point she says, I was 50 when I shot Mussolini. It seemed a good age to do it at. I remember clearly the morning of my date. I got up at 6 a.m. and went to Mass, had breakfast and tidied my room, not expecting to be back in it. I thought the tidying was the least I could do. I told the nuns that I would return for lunch. It seemed only fair to pretend for a while. But I knew that no matter what happened, I would never see that bed again. I packed carefully. I wrapped my level revolver in my black veil. I had 20 bullets hidden in my room. I would not require all of them. I put a good-sized stone in the pocket of my dress in case I needed it for breaking the car window. I closed the gate of the convent quietly so as not to disturb the prayers that already started to create the day. I walked past the lovely doors of the convent street, past the gates opening onto street gardens dripping with flowers and slippy green leaves. I could have turned back, but I left behind those quiet places and came out to match Mussolini's history with me. And it goes on and on and on and on. But it was just an exercise in trying to bring her forward a bit. I think I will read something a little bit. I'll read something here now about us all, people. Thinking about, in a way, when our ambassador mentioned what Ireland was like, I was thinking about what Ireland was like even a lot less long ago than when he was talking. But anyway, this is a story which is actually about the Irish diaspora, but it's really about Irish people in the 1980s who went away. So it's set in one street and all the people know each other, but there are a lot of letters. One person has gone to New York for a year. It's also a conversation about the Troubles, as it was called, wonderfully, euphemistically. And in a way it was very difficult to discuss the whole issue in Ireland at the time. So I've used this fictional ruse in which there's a person away, so they write letters to somebody back and forth who is visiting somebody in prison. And that way I can have the argument for and against within within the book, which I couldn't have done just as straight, have a character to do it. But this isn't about this. The bit I'm going to read you isn't about that. When I was 26, I met my husband, although I didn't know then that that was what he was. She's an air hostess, so she comes in and out of Ireland all the time. I wanted somebody not just away totally. I lived in a constantly warm house in Swords. Constantly warm because we four, all air hostesses, did different shifts. So we boiled kettles and lit fires back to back. It was a well-watched house too, by neighbours who seemed like aliens to us, people with marriages and cars and children. Kevin asked a friend of his, who was going out with Betty of the Spanish route, if he thought he'd have a chance asking me for a date. The friend, a boisterous man with a tinny laugh, told us this as a joke, and I disliked the joke so much that I found Kevin's number and asked him if he wanted to come to a party. Kevin was nervous and I simply couldn't understand why. I had no interest in him. He's not nervous now. I kept saying yes to his request for dates, which had nothing to do with wanting to go out with him. I didn't know what the reasons were. When I met him with friends of his, he wasn't nervous at all. He was rather sprightly and confident, actually. The whole thing puzzled me. When people describe, or when I read of, falling in love, it still perplexes me. That's not what happened to us. Well, not to me anyway. Maybe it did happen to Kevin, and that's why he was nervous. I would notice that when we were walking together, he would skip to get in step with me, or shuffle to get our feet hitting the ground in tandem, presuming I wouldn't notice. I quite honestly thought it was crackers, although beautiful. We got engaged. After the engagement party, Kevin and I went to bed together. Now, I hadn't much experience, much to compare. We didn't in those days. But I knew a good thing when I saw it, even if I didn't know what it was. He was simply unbelievable. I wouldn't have expected it to look at him. It's funny how stupid we are. We really do believe the ads. We think that the good lookers, the suave ones, are the ones who are good in bed. Maybe it is partly true that one needs a little confidence to start kissing and to dare in panoramic lovemaking, but only partly and only sometimes. And often, absolutely not, because the handsome can be too interested in themselves. And really, we shouldn't have fallen for that guff. Good lovemaking couldn't have been invented in the 70s, the 80s, the 50s, the 20s. Some people have always been able to do it properly, as if it mattered, and those people have not always looked the way we imagined. Kevin didn't look like Kevin the lover. We married. Kevin and I curled up into a place that became time, that became our wedding. We were almost unaware of our guests. I don't remember much about our first few months, just an overall sense of warmth, a touch of cystitis that seemed worth it, and some songs. I governed our house searching. I shifted it to streets besides nurseries and schools. It was just as well I was pregnant. All the houses seemed to boast of being near schools. That sort of advertising could force one into getting pregnant so as not to waste the amenities. I paid particular attention to nurseries. Airlines are kind to women who are expecting. Oh, I love that word, expecting. In the last month, my dreams were too weird even for dreamland, giving birth to horses' heads, and once, with my mother present, giving birth to my toilet travel bag. I can still hear her screaming, "It's a bag." My day came. With luck, most of us will die with less pain. And that is all I have to say on the matter. And it is not true that it is forgotten. It is simply misfiled for the sake of the human race. and it lies there below the skin surface of women who sometimes look at each other across crowded rooms, buses, airports, galleries, and they say nothing. Okay. I'll go back a little bit to history now, a little bit. I'm going to read from Not the Same Sky. Directly after the famine, when there were an enormous number of people in workhouses, both men and women, both girls and boys, and at the very same time, the colony, the British colony in Australia, which was set up as a penal colony, it's an extraordinary concept even, and they had taken, of course, a lot of men and women who were criminals, as they called, some political, some for stealing bread. We all know the story of how you can be criminalised. We know how people can be criminalised now for things that shouldn't be criminalised, and that's another story. I'm thinking about, because I wrote a novel and I visited death row in the United States, and because I've done a lot of research there, you would be astounded at how the prison system, for instance, in the United States has become so much like slavery, actually, cheap labour. So you will put a young man who's from a less well-off background into prison for a much less offence than if he had a good lawyer, and then you get cheaper labour there. But that's, I'm going way off the subject here. Where was I? So we know what, we can imagine the difficulties about how people were criminalised then. They had kind of run out of female criminals in England, Scotland and Wales. Although it is said that some women in London would commit specific offences in order to be sent to Australia because they might actually have a better life there. But they decided that they needed females for domestic service, and let's also admit it, to have children, white children, within Australia. And Ireland and the workhouses in Ireland was a perfect place. So under the Earl Grey scheme, it was decided to get a number of thousands of them. They did at one point think of taking boys, and then they realised they had enough boys. Well, they could criminalise them quicker. So what they did was they went through every single of the 32 counties, and from each of the workhouses in each of the counties, they took a number of these girls on 21 ships over a period of 2 years. And it was intended that it would follow on. That was not supposed to be the end of it, but in the end it was agreed that it wasn't a good plan. In the novel I actually have a list of the actual ships and the number that went from each county. And it's kind of extraordinary sometimes when I read from it. In Ireland, or indeed in Australia, people will come to see where's their county and how many came from that, because it is quite an astounding sort of thing. But this novel is written, I'm just stating the fact that this is what has happened to them. I based it on the relationship of girls that I imagine with a person who did actually exist, who was a surgeon superintendent, who I think was a very moral man, because his great boast was that the girls that he brought on the ship were fatter when they got to Sydney than when he picked them up in England. In other words, he had fed them, he had made sure that they got their amount of food rather than the crew or whatever else, or indeed selling it as some people actually did along the way. But I have created 4 characters in the way that I think that any of us as human beings would react in this kind of situation. So one is a worried person. She's always worried. And one is a person who tries to say, look, it's bad, but we'll have to get on with it. And one is a person who doesn't really quite know what, but will go with the flow and do her absolute best. And one dies with grief, really. But I'm going, and then there's a very skittery one, because I feel that you'd have to have that, hopefully within our personalities as human beings, there would be such a thing as humour that would stay with us and that would help us to get over this. You know, for instance, I'm not a great believer in victim literature, because at some point I think, yes, I think truth has to be told, but I think there is a point at which we have to say, do you know what? I'm here, let's see. So this is the one, Julia, who does that. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about her. And then I'll read you one small other bit here. Oh, I have to find this first. Well, that's a pity. It'll be here, it won't take me long. So her name is Julia, who ends up, by the way, eventually becoming a dancer, which is a little bit suspicious. We don't really know now about the dancing, but yes, here we go. Julia Cuff's first trouble came from her ability to mimic. She had tried it a few times in the first week on the ship. It had gone down well at home before the sickness, so she thought it might get her small concessions once they had set sail. But there wasn't enough room, nor room enough to create any other kind of trouble. She did try out various forms of diversion in classes, but Charles had her removed without ceremony. She was out the door before she could even figure who told on her. She always liked to know who told, even though she accepted that she had to be blamed. There always had to be someone to blame. It made others feel secure and superior. And that was her path, to be blamed, even if she wasn't at fault, although she usually was, preferring all things that were forbidden. She's bad, she's just bad, Matron had said, but Charles had said no. He thought that working in the kitchen might be the best for her, but she threw a pan at the wall. He moved her to the laundry room. He moved her to a scrubbing job. He moved her to helping Matron very early in the morning. He moved her to helping Matron very late at night. He moved her to the stern of the ship, to the middle of the ship, to the port of the ship. I'm at the back end this week, she shouted and laughed. Wait till I get to Australia, I'll show you back end. Although tempted, Charles did not move her to the hold. On the morning before the ship was to dock, Charles had brought Julia to his quarters. He wanted to have a conversation with her away from other, more fearful ears. And he wanted her to have some hours before landing to think about what he said. I wish I did not have to speak to you like this, Miss Cuff. Oh, forget the miss. Could you please try to listen, Miss Cuff? Fair enough, fair enough. There are strict laws where you are going. You will not survive if you continue to behave in this manner. In what manner? Please, Miss Cuff, as you know, I've tried to show you the rudiments of domestic service, which is what you will be required to give. Kitchens is that. Yes, kitchens, if you will. And when you arrive, you will be hired by people who will require you to have at least basic manners, of which you haven't shown much so far. Not a bit of it, she said. I don't go in for all that palaver. Could I not get a job outside of the kitchens? What kind of job? Charles said. How would I know? You're the one who brought me here. But you had a choice, he said. You all had a choice. Well, you could have said no, I think. Some choice. Miss Cuff. She was at it again, interrupting him as consistently as she had done in the first week. Miss Cuff, it wasn't exactly me who chose you. Never mind, as I said, you will be required. Require away. I'm not from Australia. I know you're not now, but you are going to be. Going to be from Australia. Don't be daft, begging your pardon, sir, as you say, but I couldn't be going to be from Australia. Well, be that as it may, you will have to work. I know that, sir. I'll find something. But how will you find something? You will be a stranger here, there. I thought you said I was going to be from there. Miss Cuff, sorry, as I said, you will be a stranger. All right, let's say you will be a newly arrived. There are dangers. I'm not afraid, Julia said. It's not a matter of whether you are afraid of those dangers or not. They are there. Now these dangers, what are they like? Are they the same as the ones at home? She asked. I have no idea with what dangers you have been acquainted in Ireland, so I cannot say. Have you ever been to Ireland? Well, Charles began. He thought that maybe he should say he had lived there for some time. Why was he allowing her to make him contemplate an untruth? Look, that is neither here nor there, he said. Oh, but it is, she said. If you've never been there, how do you know what dangers we have, or whether they're different to the ones where I'm going? At this point, Charles was overcome with the futility of the exchange, and he led her to the door. Don't worry, sir, she said, I'll be all right. And maybe she would, and maybe she wouldn't. She was the 7th girl to be hired by a burly hotel owner who needed a girl for his kitchen. As she left, she said, hey, strut, be careful. By the time she and her employer had reached the hotel, his eyebrows were up, wondering if perhaps he had not made a mistake. His wife should have come. It wasn't the mimicking so much that the landlord minded, it was what it meant, what was behind it, what it signified. So he let her go. He dismissed her early in the day, so she would have liked for a while. He might have passed her on, but he decided not to inflict her on anyone he knew. At the door she raised her voice and howled out curses in a frightening language. That's enough, the landlord shouted, but still she roared. Shut up, he screamed, but she wouldn't. He ran after her and was going to hit her when luck intervened and a policeman came by. And they brought her to the magistrate. Now, young lady, said the magistrate. Young lady, sniffed the landlord. You are, very kindly, being given a second opportunity here by your employer. Use it wisely. There are dangers out there. Do you hear me? Yes. Yes, Your Honour. Yes, Your Honour. Luckily for Julia, the magistrate did not ask her any further questions, thus denying her the opportunity to make him remember her. Dangers, he boomed. The next time the landlord threw her out, he did so at night. It is a known fact that everywhere at any time, dangers are more plentiful at night. Julia made her way through the streets, at first more afraid than she had ever been. But she did not like being afraid, so she straightened her shoulders up and walked past what appeared to be only a few men. Some of them hooted and whistled after her, drowning out the silence of those who simply looked. She made it past them, the echoes of their suggestions making her ears hot. Still, there was one thing she could do if ever she became hungry. In its way, it was dirty work, but it was work. I'll just stop that one there. Yeah. I think I've read enough now. Have I read enough now? Yeah. Or will I read a little bit more?
Yes, perhaps 5 more minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, 5 more. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, now it's hard to know what to choose. I've written a story here, by the way, about Hiroshima, about the first woman to become pregnant. I decided to do a story about Hiroshima. I was thinking the most amazing thing would be the woman who decided to become pregnant. This is an interesting thing about knowledge. Not who fell pregnant accidentally, but the idea in the human race that we would decide in the face of all that to actually become pregnant. I'll read you a tiny little bit of this. The first woman to become pregnant after the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima made love, and was made love to, in a serious fashion. There was little inclination for frippery. All around them, the lily-of-the-valley lanterns were gone. They were in the past, like all the houses, and all the street pavements, and the offices, and the schools. Although already some teachers who were left were taking the children who were left for classes under the trees, because that's what teachers do. Her greatest, the war was over too, but only just, and that was not a thing to be believed readily. Her greatest joy was that she had the nerve to do this, and her greatest hope was that once she had taken this leap, the word would spread. The man was shocked to discover that his fear and his sadness and the empty hole where he thought he had a heart all came together to strengthen his body deliberately. He was, too, shocked when he discovered that the woman appeared to fill up with startled joy. She felt herself become pregnant, knew that the egg had split. It sent a quiver to her rib cage, and she screamed with delicious fright. The man may have felt it too. He certainly felt her strive to take every ounce of the soul and body of him into her. Actually, I won't read any more of that because it's a complete deal. But it says, oh yes, what I was going to say, and it's a kind of an interesting thing about knowledge and sort of on the theme we're at, about women and where they fit into the society. In this modern day, when I was doing research for the story, I contacted various people to ask, was there contraception in Japan at the time? Because I wanted it to centre on someone who had deliberately made the decision to become pregnant. So in order to make a deliberate decision, there had to be a way that she could have avoided that decision. So one set of people said to me, oh yes, 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 there was contraception, not a problem, yes, there was condoms, everything, and indeed Mary Stopes had already come to Japan. Mary Stopes, you may know, was a founder, she would have been the person at the Mary Stopes clinic that you sometimes hear about in the world, and she would have been very involved in the whole issue of contraception. So I sort of thought, well, okay, that's fine, I can continue with the story now with the original idea. But then somebody told me that no, there were condoms, but the condoms were only being given to people who would be sleeping with American soldiers. And the idea was that they wouldn't become pregnant by American soldiers. And that yes, Mary Stopes had indeed sailed to Japan, but they hadn't allowed her to land. So she'd been on a ship there, but they hadn't on the first occasion allowed her to land. So you could be told the truth in various different ways. So I think I will, I'll finish there. Will I finish there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then
2 more minutes, okay, 2 more. Well then what I will do is I will read you one chapter, which is a page and a half, which is about what I imagine happens with all these 4,440, either 4 or 5 girls who were taken, and who went to all parts of Australia. On a morning in 1860, so it's 2 days, it's 2 years exactly since their boat has landed in Australia. On a morning in 1860, the sun once again began its high climb in the sky in Sydney and Brisbane, Yass, Gundagai and thereabouts, Melbourne, Ballarat, Castlemaine, Adelaide and lots of other places, many of them just named or given new names. Women and men rose out of their sleep at that moment all equal to each other, until the joy or the sadness or the in-between came over them with the full opening of their eyes. Cissy Weir stretched her legs in bed. Still behind closed eyes, she knew by the weight of her body that no child had woken in the night. She turned into her husband's back for another few minutes. Celia McElroy, just down the road, decided to start a new list today. She did that regularly. It kept her life tripping along nicely. Biddy Callahan in Gundagai looked for the sixpence that she had put away. They gave it every year to Yari, the man from the Wiradjuri people, who had rescued her and her baby from the big flood in 1852, as well as 40 others. Her husband was thought to have drowned, but she was never sure. She had a new husband now. Rose Ty in Cootamundra got things ready to sit her last baby outside for the first time. He had been the hardest to have, but smiled at her often, as if to make up for it. Teresa Fury thought she would clean her kitchen today as soon as she had it to herself. This need to clean came over her at the same time every year. Rose Larkin rolled herself out of bed. She felt that the baby might come today. there was a difference to the way it had turned in her last night. Ellen McGillicuddy cleared last night's playing cards from the small table and patted the heads of her children as they went out to school. She always had to remind herself to do it to all of them, not just the first. When she had looked at him on the second day of his life, she had said, well, that's that then, I'm from here now. Anne Sherry in Sydney started to make another hat. Charles Strutt started another journey by sea. Honora Taff opened her trunk to clean it and took her bonnet out to air. She thought of herself as raftery when she did this. Julia Cuff got on another coat. It was Honora Raftery who realised what date it was. This time she wrote it down so she would remember next year, and the year after, and the year after that as well.
Thanks very much, Evelyn. That was amazing. Just to listen to you. Thanks so much. I would like to start with some general questions, just to break the ice before I focus on your latest work. And I would like to begin by mentioning you were involved in the radical end of the Irish Women's Liberation Movement, Irish Women United. Looking back at that stage in your life and bearing in mind the title of this conference, Female Challenges in Our Studies, 19th-21st Centuries, what challenges did you face?
I think, will I stand up? Will I stand? Yeah, I'll just stand up here because it's easier. It's easier that way. I think in Ireland we probably face the same challenges as women faced in every place else in the world, with varying degrees. It's a complicated story, I think, you know, and I mean, this would take a long, long time to explain. I mean, I think that the Catholic Church got its power in Ireland not because of the fact that Irish people were particularly interested in the dogma of the Catholic Church, but for political reasons. And that's another long historical way to look at things. But I think that that very power and the complication of people holding on to Catholicism as a political act against England, rather than it being a spiritual thing, has actually mucked up an awful lot of things for us in Ireland. So I think that we specifically had a very difficult relationship to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church had a very difficult relationship to the state, and that meant that there were a lot of things that we had to fight for that other places didn't, like the basics, like contraception. But they did have to fight for it in other places too, so in that way we're similar. So when we, in that movement at the time, when that was the main thing we would have been fighting for, and we would have been fighting for divorce as well, although we knew it would be further on down the road. But we allied ourselves continuously with people, women and men around the world who were involved in those struggles as well. So it was, there's also something else I have to say, it was great fun. We were changing the world. You know, sometimes people sort of look on it, they talk about all that terrible work we had to do. It was terrific. We were engaged with what was happening around us. I mean, I think it's a worse place to be if you're in a situation in which you're actually just endlessly complaining about it, but not getting on with sort of trying to change or whatever. So, you know, we faced exactly the same as women in other places faced, except we had a bigger and a much longer fight to get basic, what I would call basic civil rights.
And you've been reading this wonderful novel, Same Sky. Do you think you challenged Australian historians when you launched the novel? And was the novel's reception in Ireland also challenging?
There's a very interesting thing. You see, Australia's very interesting. White Australia is very interesting because it's only 200 or so years old. So everybody has in their history, they've come from somewhere else, as indeed in North America. But in Australia more so because, you know, nobody had arrived there before airplanes, so nobody came in and you had to come by ship. And although some people had come from Asia, it was an extraordinary sort of notion, the idea of setting this place up at the other end of the earth as a penal colony. And the French, you know, had looked at it, and so had the Dutch, and they'd said that would never work. But the British had arrived and decided it would work. So there's an interesting thing that happens with historians there. Some of them are trying to tell a history, and yet some of them are trying to say Australia is a good place. So they can find it difficult if they feel that there is something being said which is not quite fitting into the narrative that they all talk about now, that they have constructed. Because, for instance, the first thing that some people would say is, oh, but they choose to come. They weren't convicts. They weren't made come. Yes, they did. As far as I can gather, no, in fact I know, nobody was forced to go. But what choice is that? We're talking about people going into a workhouse somewhere in the middle of the country in Ireland and saying, you know, you've been chosen to go to Australia. And remember, only the healthier ones were chosen because they didn't want somebody who was going to get sick on the way. And also some who would have had some words of English, I suspect. Although most of them Irish would have been their first language. So remember, they lost their language as well as soon as they went. But I also, you cannot say to a 14-year-old in the 1850s, will you make the choice to go to Australia? It's not like, would you like a visa for a year if you're under 26 and take the Qantas airline, you know what I mean? They wouldn't have even necessarily known where Australia was. So that was an interesting thing, that was an interesting sort of challenge. But then there were other historians who are continuously glad that something is added, including fiction, to the wider picture. There was an interesting thing happened in Ireland. One reviewer nearly lost his life because he said, I had made this a pleasant story. Now, I don't think it's a pleasant story, but I haven't done all these huge sort of big storms at sea. I have said people got sick, so I think the reader knows, okay, you get sick, there's a storm. But that sort of interested me. It was like as if this reviewer wanted me to make it more sort of tragic than I think it, and I mean, I think it just is. Whereas another reviewer reacted by saying that it was a wonderful thing to have this story without the waves, you know, because what I've tried to do is try to make them real people, really, and to give them personality. One of the problems that happens, and just on the issue of the conference, with women in art or women in literature, and I am not for 1 minute saying that men can't write about women, but I would implore them sometimes to try and learn something about the women that they know, instead of having them all these cardboard cutouts that something happens to, and then they just sort of say, I have that person in place there, you know. So what I was trying to do in this book was give the people personalities, you know, and they're not all terrific. I mean, Julia's not terrific. Julia's, you know, Julia would drive you mad. You can imagine trying to organise a ship with Julia on it, and trying to get all the rest of the girls sorted in some way when they arrive to Sydney, and you have Julia in the background continuously sniping at your heels. So, you know, but, you know, to make them real. Yeah.
Just a few more. Perhaps some of you might ask about double nurse, because there are many academics, experts on Joyce and other writers. I will focus on these two books on Catherine the Night and Two, because there are short stories in these three books I just mentioned. The first one, Going Days, included in Catherine the Night and Two. The second, The Meaning of Missing, in The Longest Back, and finally the third, Disturbing Words, included in The Glass Shore. So these two volumes, edited by Sheena Gleason. I'm addressing these short stories because all the writers included in the three collections, it is the one from the Northern Women, which unites the three books now. So what do you think about this?
Or that I'm in the one from the North, but that's great. I edited the first one because at the time there were a lot of anthologies going out from around the world again, from women, from Spanish, from different women, and there wasn't anything from Ireland. And one of the things is you kind of lose the voice then, because you get one woman then, and you get two women, and then you get another one, and you get a different one. So it was you know, it was just that voice of all of them kind of from, and there's 34 stories in it. So I was delighted about that. And then a good number of years later, Sinead Gleeson decides to do the other one. And how I'm in both of them is that I'm obviously in the one from Ireland. The Long Gaze Back includes women from the north as well. But then women in the north of Ireland really felt that they wanted one of their own. But I suggested that perhaps, you know, we could spread the border a little bit. And it includes a story from Monaghan, which is me, and one from Donegal as well. And then I specifically decided to concentrate on the border. So it was an interesting lesson for myself. I thought, if I'm saying that I think this is important, then I'm going to have to actually write the story about the border. And I realized it was one of the most difficult stories I've ever written. Because you see, you can't let politics as such affect when you're working, but yet politics is so much part of that whole issue. But I'm glad to say that I'm happy enough with what, so it's called Disturbing Words, which is about somebody living on the border in the county that I was in, and we would continuously be looking over the border. Because remember, like my mother, who is still alive, was born before the border was there. Now only just, but she's still alive. But there are people, and I mean, my father, you know, whom I knew, there was no border. And I would sometimes talk to Protestants from the north, older Protestants from the north, who are annoyed because they always had the whole of Ireland, which they considered, you know, that was their place too. So it's the idea that, and so what I've talked about is that this line is drawn, and what effect borders have on us. You know, North Korea, you know, somebody sat down and decided to divide it on the 38th parallelogram. You know, there's no reason. So it's about borders as well, any border, but it's about the border obviously in Ireland. Yeah. So I'm delighted to be in both of them, three of them. Yeah.
Perhaps some of our delegates would like to ask questions to Evelyn. I'm sure you will. No? Any question?
There you go, I've answered everything.
No? Well, I could go one more for you or two.
Oh, there's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn, for the reading. So it's when one has listened to you read your own work, and then one reads it again, your voice is in one's head forever. So thank you for that. Yeah, I was going to ask you actually a very simple question, but you know this. I've been intrigued by your use of letters in your fiction, and in different ways, because letters are also interesting from the point of view of borders, movement and mobility and all that. And because it's so important in your work, and we now live in this globalized world in which letters are simply disappearing, you know, blogs and internet and whatever, but the letters are gone. And I always thought I should ask you this question. What's going to happen with the letters in your work?
I think I'm going to continue. A glass full of letters, every second chapter is in letter form, and I still use it quite a lot. And I've used some made up ones as well. It's kind of interesting because I've actually read some books in which they're putting in emails. I mean, remember there is a history of the epistolary novel. I mean, one of my great loves is Natalia Ginsburg, The City and the House, which is the letters really between two brothers who the house is being sold in Rome because one of them is emigrating to America. And oh, it's just wonderful. And quite short letters. But I've read some where they've attempted this with emails, but once you see the word email, it doesn't have the same ring. But I think I'm just going to continue to use the notion of it. It's a very interesting thing. I was giving a class one time, adults returning to education, and I was talking about letters and ways of trying to get them to go back to using a pen and paper, and I was sort of thought, we'll talk about letters. And there were about 60 people, and so I sort of tried to find out who would write letters, and most of them would write a letter once a year, whatever. And one man said he writes a letter every week, and I said, gosh, that's amazing, who do you write to? Every week, I write to my brother every week. And there was a silence, and I thought, oh God, his brother's in jail. I thought, because that's the only reason you'd be writing to your brother every week. And he was. But it was an interesting thing. This man wrote a letter every week, still. So we might end up in a situation in which it's only, you know, but I'm still going to use them. Yeah.
Any other question?
Hi, thanks for your readings. Amazing, thank you. My question is, you as an Irish writer, is your writing at all influenced or marked by other writings from Great Britain, and particularly postmodernism as it's gaining so much importance in England? Does it affect your work, the way you write at all?
Absolutely not. That's really easy. But listen, I want to know, who do you think, when you say about postmodernism, who are you thinking of?
I believe I was thinking as the movement in general more than like the tenets, so like including letters, or just like the way you organise the chronology of the stories.
Yeah, no, I don't think it affects me at all. I'll tell you what, I will say, one of the things that I think, you know, when you're beginning to throw your lot into following the notion that you will be a writer, which can be a scary enough thing, but the great thing is you don't know what it's going to be like, you know, so it's okay. But I would have been more influenced at the time by work by African Americans, or I was very interested in the work of Grace Paley, great Jewish New Yorker, whose family had come from east of Moscow. I remember her telling me a great story. Her father or grandfather used to say to her that the worst thing in the world you could be was a socialist Jew under the Tsars, unless, of course, you were Irish under the English. And this old Russian man used to say this to her, and she would think, gosh, where's Ireland? What's been going on there? It was an amazing thing that was lodged in her head as a child. But I certainly would have read a lot of her, but I would have had to get myself out of literature written by Irish men for a while, because the brain was not going to function in the way that I needed to write if I didn't do that. So I quite happily did that for quite a number of years, and it was great. The reason it was great is that I learned all this other work that I would never have known about, and then I came back to them. But I came back to them having been educated by all the rest of my reading. So I looked at them in a completely new light, and I could feel who was good and who was trying, and I could feel who was just sort of being sloppy.
You just said, which I thought was really interesting, that being influenced by African Americans. Do you think that there are any parallels in the people of Ireland and the African Americans? Because African Americans were also like community, greater English speaking community that were like hugely segregated, and that as well.
Yeah, okay. There was two reasons. One was that the feminist movement and the black civil rights movement was opening up the whole notion of language and literature. And that's what was interesting for me, because I wasn't interested in writing an Irish story like had been written before. I was interested in challenging the perception of Ireland as well, and I was interested in challenging where women fitted into that literature as well as everything else. So that was the obvious place for me to look. It wouldn't have been obvious to look what was going on in England at the time, or in other places, completely not. What was terribly interesting about the African Americans was, you know, they had no loyalty to the language. Because they didn't have to.
No, se apaga como si se hubiese puesto en reposo, pero no está en reposo ni...
In the way they approached the work. And that really interested me. And I often, when writers are beginning, both men and women, I would now say to them, go back to that work, because it shows an amazing sense of freedom in the way they approach things. But if you mention if there were any parallels with Ireland, there was an interesting thing. There's a great thing, Tony Kate Bambara, whom I mentioned earlier on. She wrote a lot about music, old men playing tunes. I remember reading one of them and thinking, gosh, this is just so like what I read about that extraordinary thing when Irish music was opening, allowing its own heart to have enthusiasm and whatever else come into it. And that seemed very like, I thought she wrote stories like that. She's been described as writing jazz. And then Zora Neale Hurston is another person who, for instance, did a huge amount of study on the music, and she kind of did sociological studies as well. So those people were an obvious attraction. And then, of course, I read a lot of the African American men after I had read them.
Grabamos mucho, hay que grabar notes pequeños, o sea, una fase queremos grabar cuando finalice.
Pero desde atrás.
Sí, desde donde está.
And you see, publishing houses would do that at the time. Various publishing houses and
Le grabo a Melania entonces, ¿no?
Black American publishing houses or work that is published as a result of all that wonderful movement. That's all gone. That's really depressing. Because now publishers want, to publish. I mean, it's not true that they're still not publishing good work. Of course they are. But one of the problems is that there's a huge amount of money put into some people, and when that's done, then you have to put more and more money into that. So the really interesting work is being left behind. Now it's harder to find that work because of the conglomerate of publishing. But it just means that as teachers, and as readers, and as writers, we just have to make people more aware of it and say, look, you're going to have to look a little bit harder, but it's there, it's there. We don't want everybody reading the same book. You know this thing, we have a thing we have a thing in Ireland in which they want everybody reading the book in the one day, and I thought, why would you be doing that? And one city, one book, why? Why would you? It's terrific to be reading the same book as 12 people at the same time, but not the whole world. We learn nothing, we'll have no difference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Or no? Well, I would like to thank you, Evelyn, for your reading and for this interview and for being here. I wish you all the best for your future works. And I would like to make 3 announcements, right? Well, one is that Evelyn has brought some works and they are here for sale, a very reasonable price, both for students and academics. Then the second one, perhaps you want her to sign up. Then another one is, please, all the tutors, go to the registration desk and pick up all the certificates before every session, and then please ask the rest of the delegates to finish at 5:30 in the afternoon, because the buses will be waiting for us from 5:30 onwards. We will be leaving at 15 to 6, right? So just to make sure that we are at the Bancos Museum and Winery on time. And I think that's, and and there's coffee break now. But in the other building, thanks Jonathan. So we'll go to the other building, the main building, where the registration desk is now, and we'll have a coffee. Okay? Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.